A congressman who's lived his whole life on the border just humiliated the defense secretary on live television. What was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing turned into a devastating takedown. It wasn't just about policy or budgets or party politics. It was about credibility and the difference between someone who's lived the border every single day of his life and a Washington official who only knows it through photo ops. And when the questions started flying, the secretary couldn't keep up. The man leading this charge was Congressman Gabe Vasquez from New Mexico. And here's the thing. Vasquez isn't just another politician parroting talking points.
Miles there are in New Mexico?
Not the exact number of miles.
Can you give me a round figure?
Hundreds.
Okay, 180 miles. Can you tell me where the border wall starts and ends on this map of New Mexico?
I'm not properly oriented to your map, but I know that unfortunately, because of the administration previous, they did not have the opportunity to finish the border wall.
Thank you,
let it rust
Secretary.
on the ground instead of
Thank you,
putting it up,
Secretary. And you have been to
defending
New
our border.
Mexico. Could you tell me where in New Mexico you've been to?
I've been to the border twice to look at once at our national defense area down there because I can't recall a time when a Secretary of Defense has gone down in the first 4 or 5 months of his tenure to the border to better understand.
Was that in
the
an urban
situation
area
there.
or in a rural area?
Both areas, traversed rural areas and urban
Okay,
areas.
so you must be
Some
familiar.
with walls, some without.
Secretary.
And if President Trump was actually supported, we'd have a
Thank
border
you, Secretary. I reclaim my time. So the most remote part of New Mexico is called the Boot Heel. And I'm not sure that you spent any time in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. Mr. Secretary, I was raised on the border. I've lived there my whole life. I've worked alongside ranchers, farmers, landowners, wildlife biologists, and other stakeholders for over a decade. I headed a border security task force in my district before coming to Congress. I've traveled with Border Patrol on ATVs. I've hunted the border on horseback and hiked dozens of miles in the most remote stretches of the border in this region. Now, do you happen to know why there hasn't been a border wall built in the Boot Heel?
Well, based on what you just described, you should be a big fan of what our administration is
Well,
undertaking.
Secretary, I'm asking why a border wall has not been built. Funds have been allocated for other parts of the border.
Here's
but
what
not
I know.
here.
Our commanders on the ground and others and our engineers would understand what goes where and why, and where there should be a border wall, there will be a border wall.
Okay,
It will be
Secretary-
funded through reconciliation.
Secretary,
because
are you
President
familiar
Trump
with the
is gonna
Animas
deliver on
Mountains,
it.
with Alamo Hueco, with San Luis Mountains, with Guadalupe Pass or Long Canyon?
Again,
Critical border areas.
I'm aware that there are gaps in different places where walls are not as much as effective as other places, and I get that.
Thank
We're
you,
applying
Secretary.
infrastructure
I appreciate your
where
answer
it
on that.
makes the most sense because
Thank
we're
you.
going to get 100% operational
Thank you,
control of the border.
Secretary. So you agree then that a border wall doesn't make sense for the entire country?
I think we need a border wall across our entire border.
Okay, so you should know then why it's almost physically impossible to build a border across the Animas Mountains and the terrain challenges that that poses and the billions of dollars. Do you know if there's roads on those mountains currently?
If we're going to spend money as a government,
Okay.
it should be
I'll take that as a
to
no.
secure our southern
Well,
border.
the point I'm trying to make, Secretary, is that if this is so important to the military, and you as Secretary of the Department of Defense should know more about the border. Mr. Secretary, I urge you to skip the photo ops next time that you go to a port of entry and spend time on the ground in places like the Diamond Day Ranch.
I think you should ask the soldiers on the border whether they've been photo op visits or not, because I spent a lot
Secretary-
of time on the ground
Secretary,
with
are
the
you-
soldiers, getting an understanding of what
Secretary,
they're
I'm
facing,
gonna
what
ask
they're
you a
doing,
question
what
that-
their capabilities
Secretary,
are.
I reclaim
not
my
for a
time.
photo op.
Thank you.
As a
Secretary, I
Secretary of
reclaim
Defense
my
to
time.
understand what our
Chairman,
troops
may I
do
reclaim my
and
time?
why.
Gentleman
they
reclaims
do it.
his time.
Thank you. Secretary, do you know what a tethered aerostat system is?
I do.
Okay. Well, great. Then you know that this type of surveillance technology is superior to having thousands of troops sitting in trucks looking at an empty desert. I've requested funds for more tethered aerostat systems. We haven't had a response from your department. Are you familiar with ASTs?
What's an AST?
Well, it's an autonomous surveillance tower. They're equipped with these advanced cameras that have the capability to relay critical information to border agents on the ground. And this type of technology is badly needed on the Boot Heel. And it's a much better expenditure than a border wall is.
I've seen that.
Impossible.
I've seen those towers in use.
Great. Well, these technologies have been described to me by both Border Patrol and CBP as force multipliers, allowing their personnel to focus on law enforcement efforts while leaving this mundane surveillance task to much more efficient and cost-effective technology, a much more efficient way to surveil that part of the border. Now, Mr. Secretary, I have serious concerns with your fundamental lack of knowledge about the U.S.-Mexico border, considering the billions of dollars that DOD is slated to spend on this mission, with little clarity to those of us who live there. I would encourage you to do some homework on my region and learn what will actually make our border more secure and more safe. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair.
He was born and raised in a border district. He's lived the terrain, worked with farmers and ranchers, patrolled with Border Patrol agents, even led a local task force focused on border security. This wasn't theory for him. It was his life, and across from him sat Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who had barely set foot in New Mexico. Hegseth came armed with broad answers, political slogans, and the kind of vague assurances that play well in D.C. But Vasquez wasn't interested in D.C. soundbites. He came with facts, lived experience, and a point to prove. And what happened next would leave the secretary scrambling for answers. The congressman didn't waste time. He went straight for the numbers. Vasquez pointed out that the Department of Defense had already diverted over $1 billion from critical military modernization and housing projects to fund militarized deployments at the border. Money that should have gone to better equipment, better housing, and better lives for U.S. troops was instead burned on short-term optics. He described it bluntly. $500 million here, hundreds of millions there. Money meant for America's warfighters, now wasted on troop deployments that accomplished little more than creating photo ops for politicians. And the punchline? Vasquez made it clear that people back home weren't impressed. These weren't flashy DC solutions. They were band-aids meant for cameras. And every wasted dollar was a dollar not invested in real, lasting security. But that was just the beginning. Vasquez then turned the hearing into something closer to a classroom, and the secretary failed the test. The congressman asked a simple question. How many border miles are in New Mexico? The secretary fumbled. He guessed hundreds. Wrong. Vasquez corrected him. The real number was 180. Not complicated, not hidden. Just basic geography that anyone serious about the border should know. But Vasquez didn't stop there. He pulled out a map. Could the secretary point out where the border wall started and ended in New Mexico? Hegseth struggled, mumbling excuses about orientation and administration policies. It was a humiliating moment, made worse by how simple the question was. And then Vasquez hit him with another one. Where in New Mexico had the secretary actually been? Hegseth admitted he had only made 2 trips. Vague visits, focused more on optics than real learning. The congressman wasn't impressed. And what happened next exposed the secretary's lack of real knowledge even more. Vasquez didn't just know the border, he knew the terrain. He brought up the Bootheel region, one of the most remote stretches of the New Mexico border. He'd lived it, hiked it, hunted it on horseback, and worked with the people who live there every day. And he asked the secretary, why hasn't a border wall been built there? The truth is simple. It's almost physically impossible. The Animas Mountains, the Guadalupe Pass, Long Canyon, these aren't just place names. They're natural barriers, rugged, remote, and unforgiving. To build a wall across them would cost billions and achieve almost nothing. But when pressed, the secretary couldn't explain it. He dodged, deferred to commanders, and tried to change the subject. Vasquez, meanwhile, laid out the reality. A wall doesn't make sense everywhere. You can't just draw a straight line across a map and expect concrete to cover it. And with that, the congressman had backed the secretary into a corner. But he wasn't finished. The real knockout blow was still to come. After dismantling the secretary's talking points, Vasquez pivoted to solutions. And here's where his argument hit hardest. Instead of wasting billions on walls that can't even be built, Vasquez called for technology that works. He named tethered aerostat systems, surveillance balloons that provide constant monitoring over wide stretches of borderland. He pointed to autonomous surveillance towers, advanced systems equipped with cameras and sensors that can feed real-time data to agents on the ground. These weren't just futuristic ideas. They were tools that CBP agents themselves described as force multipliers. They allow fewer people to cover more ground, keeping agents focused on law enforcement instead of staring at empty desert. And here's the kicker. Vasquez had already requested funding for more of these systems. He'd sent proposals, but the Department of Defense hadn't responded. The contrast was devastating. While Vasquez pushed for smarter, cost-effective tools backed by agents on the ground, the secretary and his department were stuck clinging to outdated political symbols. And the congressman made sure everyone watching could see that difference. By the time Vasquez finished, the room was silent. What he exposed wasn't just ignorance. It was a dangerous disconnect. Billions of dollars taken from soldiers' homes and modernization projects weren't making the border safer. They were paying for a show. The secretary couldn't answer basic questions about geography, terrain, or strategy. And worse, he couldn't admit what everyone already knew, that walls don't work everywhere. That technology, not symbolism, is what the people on the ground are asking for. Vasquez ended with a clear message. If the Defense Department is going to pour billions into border operations, then the least they could do is understand the reality of the land, the communities, and the needs of those who live there. It was more than a debate. It was a wake-up call. What just happened wasn't theater. It was truth colliding with politics. On one side, a congressman armed with lived experience, facts, and practical solutions. On the other, a defense secretary lost in talking points and vague reassurances. And in that clash, the truth was impossible to ignore. Vasquez didn't just embarrass the secretary. He revealed the deeper problem: billions spent on outdated tactics, while the real solutions sit ignored. The people who live on the border know the challenges, they know the terrain, and they know what works. Yet Washington still refuses to listen. So the question isn't whether a wall should be built across mountains or deserts. The real question is this: why are we still funding photo ops instead of solutions? If this exchange made you pause, that's a good thing. Because we need more leaders like Gabe Vasquez, people who've lived the reality, who know the land, and who refuse to let politics replace facts. If you believe border security should be built on reality, not theater, hit the like button. If you learned something new today, subscribe for more in-depth breakdowns. And share this video, because in a time when photo ops dominate, the facts deserve the spotlight.